been a participant in this program, luckily, for back in the days when Tom White was still at Loyola, and they were really kicking things off. So I'm happy to be involved on a continuous basis.
Thank you. Jessica?
Hi, I'm Jessica Jerwisky. I currently work at Google in a risk and compliance role. I was a student who went through IBEC and presented in, I think, 2014. And so I've stayed connected to the program ever since and have judged for several years as well. I'm based in Seattle, and my prior roles include financial services at US Bank and med device at Medtronic. So happy to be here with you all.
Terrific. If the team would introduce themselves and tell us who we are, identity is always important. It'd be great.
Of course, yes. So my name is Grant Reitz, and collectively the team is representing Penn State Smeal College of Business and specifically the Tariff Center. And today we're asking you guys to take the role of the Ticketmaster Advisory Board. Going on to Adam next.
Yeah, my name is Adam Zofko, and I'm also part of this team.
I am Angela Lemley. It's really nice to meet all of you guys.
And I'm Kate White. Really
Can
nice
you
to
tell us your whether you're freshmen, seniors, so we just have
Yeah.
a sense of that?
Probably
That'd be
should have
great.
done that. I'm
That's
a second
okay.
year, and I'm studying corporate innovation and entrepreneurship at the business school.
Great.
I'm a fourth year and I'm studying finance.
I am a second year in marketing.
I am a junior in science and business.
Terrific. I need to read what you already know, but nonetheless, I need to do it again. Listen with fresh ears.
Of
The
course.
full presentation. In this part of the competition, you're taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges, which you just did. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask you questions for 20 minutes. And in that role, we will be playing the role that you asked for advisory board members in the questions that we ask. After the Q&A, the judges will be who we are now and will give you feedback outside that role. Some important things to keep in mind: the ethical aspects of your analysis are the most important part. However, these should be described in a simple, practical, common sense fashion. Using technical philosophical terminology or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness. During the presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. Are there any questions? Well, I have one for you. Do you want the timer that I set, and I'm sure you'll be setting a timer yourself, do you want the timer to be 25 minutes or do you want it to be 30?
I would say we're probably going to independently time ourselves. So whatever is comfy for you is best.
No, you get to decide.
Oh, okay. How about 30 minutes, team? Is that good?
That's
Sweet.
okay. So that will be fine. And give me a second. All right.
Yep, that-
And if you're ready to start, just say start and I'll hit my button too.
Yeah, I'm going to have Adam pull up the slide deck. Awesome. All right. And once I say start, we're good to go?
Yes.
Awesome. Just give me one moment. All right. Start. Good afternoon. Thank you, Ticketmaster Advisory Board, for joining us today. As board members, it is your responsibility to understand the customer experience inside and out, whether positive or negative. Because of this, I'd like to put you in the shoes of your amazing customers. So let's say 5 of your closest friends have decided to plan a getaway trip to go to your favorite artist, Harry Styles' concert. You have the flights, the hotel rooms, and the rental car. Now it's time just to buy the concert tickets. All of you budgeted about $300 to cover the price of these tickets, and now it's time to enter the queue. Unfortunately, half the group missed the initial queue and are now 500th in line, but the rest of the group are now through the queue and are ready to enter credit card information, but are alarmed in the difference in price you anticipated to pay and the price you see at the point of purchase. Your once $300 budget for a ticket is now shocked as you see the cost approaching $500 due to high and hidden fees. This consumer belief and experience you just witnessed of high and hidden fees is the root cause of an industry-wide problem surrounding ticketing. Today, our team Boomerang Advisory Group is here with you all to analyze the problem and introduce our 2 recommendations, which is to increase transparency and introduce a fees cap. I'd like to introduce our team once more. As we said, we are Boomerang Advisory Group, an Australian-based consulting firm specializing in strategy and recommendations for ethical considerations. Like I said, my name is Grant Wrights.
My name is Adam Zofko.
I'm Angela Lamley.
And I'm Kate White.
Now, as far as the agenda goes, we first want to start with what the problem is. We know the fans are upset with these high fees, so we have to further analyze the problem. To go about that, we have to look at the tangible harm that's being created through this problem and how can we effectively address these concerns through our approach. With our approach, we then develop recommendations which your team should ultimately do to effectively address the problem and carry out our approach through strategic implementation. Any decision you make now will have long-term impact in all the realms such as ethical concerns, financial returns, and adherence to the law. Then, to conclude the presentation today, we will look at next steps on what your team should do tomorrow to successfully implement our recommendations. So let's dive into the problem. In 2010, Ticketmaster and Live Nation both merged into one cohesive company. Ticketmaster, which is the biggest provider in the world, has dominated primary and secondary markets for years to come. And then Live Nation, the world's leading live entertainment provider, has facilitated events at venues worldwide. This conjoinment of 2 industry powerhouses now contributes to about 66% of ticket sales and 80% of the venues. Because of this, there is some speculation from the public that there's monopolization and anti-competitive pricing strategies occurring in the industry. Now let's dive into some current events. Some of the main current events have been recent lawsuits against Ticketmaster that have flooded the media and ultimately hurt Ticketmaster's public perception and reputation. The 3 main ones we want to highlight are Drake, Taylor Swift, and Bruce Springsteen related instances. Specifically with Bruce Springsteen, fans are outraged by the amount of fees that are added on at the end of the purchasing experience. They see a set price, enter their credit card information, and then at the point of purchase are alarmed by these high and hidden fees. It is known that service fees can add up to about 30%. Due to this uncertainty and frustration with the prices, fans have took these actions to the courts. Now, let's first look at, are any laws even being broken? Ticketmaster, from a legal standpoint, has not broken any laws, but there are some implications that were surrounding these instances. So specifically, 4 that I'd like to talk about today are the New York State Senate bill, which relates to upfront disclosure, the Sherman Antitrust Act, which relates to monopolization, and then the Bots Act, which relates to automated ticket purchasing. But today, specifically, the Robinson-Patman Act and its dynamic pricing structure is utmost importance, given this is a market and demand-based price setting industry. As far as specific goes, there are independent plaintiffs taking on Ticketmaster due to the Taylor Swift fiascos, where they're claiming violation of antitrust laws. As far as specific governmental action, the State Judiciary Committee has explored the potential harm that consumers face due to the merger between Ticketmaster and Live Nation. Now, people think that the main problem is simply that the fees are too high, but we first must dissect what the fees and the face value of the cost of the ticket actually might be. As far as the ticketing structure, there's a face value that is both market and demand based in collaboration with your clients, the artist. And then there's service, order processing, delivery, and other fees that are added on top of that contribute to the ultimate end all be all price. The fans are outraged and think that the prices and the fees are way too high, but we first need to see, is that 1, even the main problem, and 2, if not, what might be? Now, when you're thinking about these high prices, the ultimate solution might be, well, just lower the fees. But Ticketmaster simply cannot do that. Despite complaints, Ticketmaster needs these high fees to sustain costly operations of their business. Ticketmaster's main operating expenses relate to venues, promoters, and artists. As far as venue goes, in order to land a venue, it is a bidding system. So upfront advances and bonuses are needed to cover these costly expenses of the contracts with venues. Additionally, promoters are needed to book these venues, and it is another fee that is included in the operating expenses Ticketmaster faces. And then lastly, given there are contractual relationships between you and your artists, the artists are involved because a lot of money from these fees are dispersed throughout those contracts, going specifically to those artists. Now, if the problem that we are solving is simply not solved just by lowering the fees, we must first see what exactly are we trying to solve. The main problem we see with Ticketmaster is that there's one, a lack of transparency, and two, uncertainty with the fees. As far as lack of transparency goes, your fans believe that they're being deceived by Ticketmaster's actions, and they're unaware of these added fees until the end of the process for purchasing a ticket. And then next, with uncertainty and final price, your artists have no certainty of the final price of your tickets until they see their fans' opinions on them. There's been several current events where artists have faced scrutiny from their own fans about these high tickets, and the artists simply have no idea that it happened due to Ticketmaster's actions. Now, given we've mentioned several different groups of people that are impacted, it's important to see from an ethical standpoint who else might be impacted. So let's look at some key stakeholders. Obviously, you all, the board of directors, the company of Ticketmaster, are responsible for overseeing everything below them from a employee hierarchy standpoint. So you guys are in charge of making decisions that impact each sequential stakeholder. Next, the fans. The fans are the ultimate ones that are providing the resources and the financial impact for Ticketmaster to make their business and have a revenue. And then the courts. Given there are some cases, the courts have to be involved because there's lawsuits being settled and filed against them. And then lastly, the artists, because there are contractual relationships with Ticketmaster. And then to round things out, the competitors. This is an industry-wide problem, and competitors are benefiting from the public outrage against Ticketmaster as people are jumping ship from Ticketmaster to other events. Now, we assessed the problem. Let's first go into the approach that we're going to take, and I'll pass it off to Adam, and he will talk about the approach to solve this problem.
Thanks, Grant. So Grant touched a little bit about the problem we're trying to address and specifically why it's an ethical problem. What I want to do is explain how we approach addressing this problem, specifically from an ethical perspective. And to do so, we need to understand how we can address it ethically. So to do so, we need to look at the rights of our stakeholders. Now, to clarify what the rights of the stakeholders are, we believe these rights are things that we need to do for our stakeholders to retain them as clients. So in the case of this problem, we are looking at fans and artists, and specifically what we need to do as a company so that you can retain them as your clients and continue to make money from them. So looking first at the rights of your fans, we believe that they must be provided with fair and enjoyable services to continue buying tickets through Ticketmaster. If we don't do that for them, then they're simply going to leave and go to one of your competitors. Now, currently, Ticketmaster is violating this right because the fans feel that your company is deceiving them with hidden fees that are not clearly communicated to them. Looking at the artists, we see that they must be treated with fairness in promotions and distribution of tickets to be retained as clients. Currently, your company is making these artists feel like they are losing control over the pricing of their tickets, for which their shows and which they ultimately reflects poorly on them as artists. And now we understand why we're violating them, but why is this a problem for your company? It's a problem because you're experiencing tangible harm as a result. So looking back again to these rights and how your company is violating them, we see two things happening. First, for fans, we see that fans have been filing lawsuits, which results in either refunds or settlements, or even just overall negative PR for Ticketmaster. Looking at artists, we've seen artists turn their fan bases against your company, and even try to strive away from using your company as a platform to be promoted upon for their concerts. Now, aside from just the tangible harm that's been impacting your company, we've also seen the intangibles related to what your company believes and how these actions don't line up with your core values. Upon research, we struggled to find core values for your company. So what we did is we wanted to understand the purposes that your company sets forth and draw values from those statements. We looked towards the Who We Are page on Ticketmaster's website, and we found 3 statements were made. These statements were for the love of live entertainment, the love of fans, and the next big thing. What we want to do is draw implied values from these statements to kind of establish your core values as a company that motivates why you act the way you do. Looking first for the love of live entertainment, we see this value of excellence, that your company needs to be at the top of its respective realm in the online ticketing and online experience space. Next, for the love of fans, we see a lot of values that could play well with this statement, but with regards to the specific problem we're looking at today, we believe the most relevant value is this value of trust. Because if you don't have trust with your fans, then the fans are simply going to leave and go to another platform that they trust more. Lastly, for the next big thing, we see this value of innovation, that your company needs to continue doing other things that other competitors are not, so you can stay at the front end of this online ticketing industry. Now, for the purposes of us developing recommendations for your company to address the problem Grant touched on, we want to focus on trust and how we can build trust with your two most important stakeholders, your fans and your artists. Now, we understand that having these three values may be a little confusing as to how they play out with their recommendation. So to make it easier for your team to internally grasp and hold on to, we developed a mission statement that your company can adopt, since Ticketmaster currently does not have a distinct mission statement. Now, that statement reads as follows. Our mission is to provide honest and fair opportunities for our fans and artists to connect through excellent live entertainment while continuing to push the balance of online ticketing. And once again, you see the three values being drawn from this statement. You see this value of excellence, that when we develop recommendations, we don't simply want them to be ethically sound, but we want them to be positive for your company from a financial perspective. Next, looking at innovation, developing recommendations shouldn't just be pulling from what other companies are doing. We want to continue to innovate in this space and bring in new ideas that no other company is doing to continue to allow Ticketmaster to be at the front end of this industry. And lastly, and arguably the most important, is this value of trust, that every solution we present to you guys today ultimately produces more trust between your fans and your artists. Now, considering all we've done today so far, with Grant discussing the problem and myself discussing how we approach solving that problem, we officially want to lay out our key question that we look to answer within this presentation. And that key question is this: how can you build trust with your fans and artists to reinforce their rights and avoid the tangible harm impacting your team while creating value for the company? Now, to answer this question, we developed a two-pronged strategy as a recommendation. The first part is directed towards your fans, where we believe you should institute transparent fees within your company's platform. By doing so, you can remove the deception from this process of purchasing tickets and encourage your fans to trust your company more. Our second recommendation is instituting a fees cap that can ensure the integrity of pricing, so that artists will trust the price potential when it comes to signing a contract with your company. And we believe both of these recommendations can reinforce the rights of your stakeholders, thus retaining them as clients by building trust. And we believe this is the best strategy to address the problem and set up Ticketmaster for long-term success. I now love to pass it off to my colleague Angela to begin discussing our first recommendation.
Thanks, Adam. So we've just heard those questions we need to tackle, our new mission, and where our stakeholder relationships currently stand. We're going to have to figure out how to take that mission on and start repairing those relationships. So I'm going to run you guys through the first prong of our recommendation, involving a transparent pricing initiative through those transparent fees, really hitting hard at that first prong of the fans and guiding them through that full ticket buying journey and addressing the deception that your fans are feeling. When that repeated, it breeds a sense of long-term distrust. So it's really important to tackle that head on. But before we touch on those specific recommendations, we want to start answering the question of why should we care about transparent pricing and does it really work? The answer is yes. Research shows that price transparency increases customer trust and satisfaction within a company. And in comparing that effectiveness of different pricing strategies, a study conducted through firstly a hotel website, which just like Ticketmaster uses dynamic pricing, and then again with a laptop website of relatively static pricing structure, both cases found that the process with the most transparent pricing resonated with the consumer more time and time again. So we can see here that that perceived value of the product translates directly into the customer's willingness to pay, and that higher initial face value still yields better conversion results than a lower number communicated deceptively. So now that we know the effectiveness of transparency with our consumers, let me take you through Boomerang's recommendations. Our transparency initiative as a whole is going to stand on two pillars, but we're first going to look at how the fees are presented during that initial search for your tickets, and then dive into redesigning how you are communicating those fees. Looking at what that process of ticket searches currently look like, we're sitting at a price point of $3.99 here, but it doesn't include those additional fees. And we recognize that there is an option to view those full prices, including the fees, but it is hidden within the filtered section of your website. And as a result, despite the fact that you do have those tools, the customers are still left in the dark until the point of purchase and then put on the defensive when they're dealing with all of these fees that they weren't originally prepared for. So Ticketmaster is still coming off as deceitful nevertheless, and the option exists, but because the consumer is unaware, we cannot count that as effective communication. To mitigate this, we have designed two solutions for you. Firstly, we've created a fee calculator tool to allow your customers to check how much their fee would be at any given time. And I will dive into the specifics of that later. But alongside that, we also recommend bringing that price transparency filter out into the clear of the user interface, making that also the default setting and giving fans the ability to see that complete price before the point of purchase. That could easily be turned on and off through a toggle if fans do choose to go without that information, but it should on default be readily available as a part of Ticketmaster's shift towards increased customer company transparency. So let's take a look at the specifics of that fee calculator that Boomerang has designed for you guys. We really want to leverage your expert understanding of the dynamic pricing model and then translate that into something that's easily accessible and delivered in a proactive manner to your customers. So we've designed this calculator to provide your fans with an accurate estimation of how much those additional fees would be based on your customer's location, the proximity to the venue, the time and date that the event is being held, as well as the current demand that that event might be experiencing. So we really want to be able to provide assurance to the customer and make them feel safe and informed at all steps along the way. Now that we've shown that new commitment to transparency, we're going to pivot over to our new renewed communication strategy with the fans, and that involves a reimagining of the fee breakdown page. Currently, this is what the page looks like, and there's two pressing issues, one being that it is an overload of information, and two being that the information is unclearly worded. So instead of sorting through those paragraphs of policies, we recommend sorting that and breaking it down into three of the most pressing questions that you receive from your fans. One being, how are these fees determined? Two, where do they go? And three, what other general information do we need to know about them? So to answer those questions, Boomerang has designed 3 infographics and tailored each of them specifically to answer those questions. Let's first look at that first question. How are these fees determined? Our team recommends clearly and transparently communicating the 5 main causes that hike those face value prices up out of necessity and illustrating it through a clear and accessible way. Designed for quick and easy processing, we've also drafted it up in a web page form to show you guys how it looks situated next to your currently existing and more detailed response. And the purpose of clear and open communication, should the customer wish to learn more about the fees, that information is readily available, but it is of the utmost importance that your customers are able to understand everything in one fell swoop with minimal effort on their part, which is what our infographics are there for. The next graphic we've designed for you guys targets the second question, where do your fees go? So this is the question we see pop up most during discourse amongst your fans community. That blame game is something that the fans struggle with, especially with pricing complications, and it has gone so far without a clear answer. So our recommendation involves breaking it down honestly, showing them that business model and each step of the process in which artist collaboration exists, where Ticketmaster earns a profit, and steps of the process where mutual benefits exist, alongside where those fees are absolutely necessary as a part of upkeep and business operations. At this point, it's really important to trust those fans to understand that Ticketmaster is a company and does need to take a profit in order to operate. Your continued repeat customers show to us that it's not the price that worries the fans, but there's a little bit of skepticism behind why this information is hidden. And trust is a two-way street. So in order to develop an environment of trust, Ticketmaster has an obligation to give that back to the consumer, and communication is key to achieve this. Now, the third graphic that we've given to you guys is touching on that last question in order to fully alleviate any worries that those customers might have. Aside from the first 2 questions, we recommend an additional third page with general information touching on who owns the tickets that are being sold, a summary on dynamic pricing, and again, a reiteration of those profit margins in relation to fees being taken. Answering these 3 questions helps us to concisely and clearly translate Ticketmaster's operations and policies to the customer. But to fully drive home that information and keep it fresh in those customers' minds, we also recommend implementing a marketing campaign to raise awareness on all the resources available. So to maximize communication, customers shouldn't have to come looking for information after they've encountered a difficulty or confusion. We recommend really sending out strategically timed and event-specific marketing campaigns in order to inform users of all the resources that are available to them through that ticketing process. Using Taylor Swift as an example, Boomerang has helped to draft up a marketing and awareness campaign that can be delivered across Instagram stories and easily resized to use across all social media platforms. Marketing campaigns tailored to each event not only communicate this information in a way that's engaging and relevant to your consumers, but also serve dually as hyper anticipation for the event, touching both of our largest stakeholders, our fans and our artists, through transparent communication. And taking that initiative to disseminate this information explicitly, clearly, and step-by-step allows you to guarantee the smoothest and most transparent, assured purchase journey in the long run. The first step to mending those strained relationships is, as I've just mentioned, transparency and communication. Now that we've run through those 2 pivotal initiatives, I will pass it on to Kate to take you through our second prong.
Thanks, Ange. So to summarize, our team has a 2-part recommendation on how Ticketmaster can address the lack of trust with fans, improve the company ethically, financially, and legally. Ange just discussed updating the website transparency filter and marketing this change to generate a better public image. Now we will address the second recommendation we have, which is a revenue cap. Now I understand this sounds counterintuitive. You would be like, why are we capping our profits? The fee cap is not meant to prevent you from optimizing on your revenue, but it's a long-term plan to save the company reputation and protect the company from being sued and ultimately help the company stay in line with its values. So what is a revenue cap? When we say revenue cap, we mean the upper limit of what the fee percentage of the tickets can be. This will only be sorry, 1 second. My phone keeps going off and I can't figure out how to turn it off. So this revenue for Ticketmaster will not impact our ability to cover our expenses because it will only be on the revenue for Ticketmaster. Other companies that have done this are the United States Postal Service and AT&T. These revenue caps help save their reputation and prevent monopoly and price discrimination lawsuits. So what is the impact of this? To analyze the impact, we must break down the ticket price. The ticket price could be segmented into 3 parts. Face value, which will cover the actual expense of the artist, the expense of the venue, which is the fee expenses, and then the fee percentage for what will contribute to the revenue of Ticketmaster. So on behalf of the customer, we have to fight through the negative PR and be able to sell them these tickets at a fair price. And to do that, we have to consider what is a fair price. Legally, to avoid being sued, and ethically to protect our customer, we must sell the tickets at a price that they can afford and that will optimize our revenue, but also optimize the value that they're getting. So an example of a fair case would be a 20% fee. This is a competitive price with our competitors, can be afforded by the target market, and won't alarm the customers at checkout. An unfair case would be 40%. This is much higher than our competitors' fees, and it will alarm the customers and put Ticketmaster at risk for a lawsuit. When Ticketmaster has had higher fees than 30% in the past, they have faced lawsuits such as with the Taylor Swift tickets. We suggest the fee cap should be about 30%. This is a good percentage that's higher than our average fee percentage of 27.85%. So there's room to grow, it exceeds our competition, and it still ensures a good relationship with our fans. Overall, you should focus on increasing transparency by renovating the website, marketing this change, and then implementing the revenue cap that will address the negative PR and legal issues. Our team has broken down the expected resources needed for these solutions. We suggest addressing the website redesign first, then implementing the fee cap, and lastly, marketing this change. The time for these changes would be less than 4 months, with more time spent on the redesign. And lastly, we broke down the estimated money investment needed to kind of implement these based on the salary prices for the talent and money needed. These resources, while a short-term cost, would be insignificant compared to the long-term benefits. So now let's dive into the long-term impact of our solution. So how does this benefit us legally? Ticketmaster lawsuits are headlines in the news. Not only does this impact the company perception, but it also has legal fees to fight, which are very costly. As you can see, the artist headlines, Taylor Swift, Bruce Springsteen, Drake, those are big artists, and that comes with a lot of publicity. All these lawsuits are from fans being angry over high prices, but implementing a fee cap with the company policy and reorganizing the website and marketing this would help prevent lawsuits against the Robinson-Patman Act, since it ensures a fair and competitive price and fix the PR issue. So what's the benefit financially? Based off the resources needed, the investment would cost about $216,000. As previously stated, we will save money from litigation fees. And a good example of this is when people were suing over high ticket prices for The Cure. Refunds went out for about $5 to $10 for each ticket sold, and the concert sold about 4,500 tickets. For reference, Ticketmaster sells about 500 million tickets a year. If the relationship with the fans are not fixed, there will be more cases like this that can add up quick. Second, fixing our public perception will lead to a long-term company success. Public perception affects the willingness of people to buy tickets from your company. An example of this is when American Airlines, after a negative PR event of overselling tickets and then having to kick patients or people off the plane, the stock price dipped significantly right after a passenger had to be kicked out. In addition, Ticketmaster's stock prices have dropped significantly recently, which correlates directly to the timeline of when all these legal issues came up. This shows why it's very needed to address the problem now to prevent long-term loss in the future. So ethically, going back to what Adam said, the high fees are violating the rights of the fans and the artists. But our two-part solution would protect and reinforce those rights. And I would now like to pass this on to Grant.
Thank you. So we talked about a lot today, but I first want to highlight some of the main points before we wrap up and provide Ticketmaster with their next steps. So the problem that we solved for Ticketmaster today is one, the lack of transparency, and then two, the uncertainty with the fees. As far as lack of transparency goes, the fans believe that they are deceived by the company since they're unaware of the prices throughout the process of purchasing their ticket. Lastly, the uncertainty in final price impacts the artist and the contractual relationships that Ticketmaster and the artists share. Now, how do we build trust amongst the fans and artists to help you and Ticketmaster grow and reverse their public perception to a positive light? First, implement these transparent fees. This removes deception. Secondly, this fees cap ensures integrity of pricing. So artists now trust their relationships with Ticketmaster when signing potential contracts, which helps heal the pastly broken relationships, but also create more for the future. And then, how do our recommendations align with your company values? Excellence, trust, and innovation all come forward into one perfect mesh to help the new mission statement. As far as excellent goes, we have a well thought out timeline and implementation strategy that we provided that will help meet the excellence of your value. And then for innovation, the practices Ticketmaster implement have developed some industry leading processes such as the graphics and the rollouts that we provided, as well as this revenue cap. And then trust, the ultimate outcome of each recommendation is trust reinstilled internally and externally. Now, what action should your company take tomorrow? First, contact the press from major media outlets and reverse the negative stigma surrounding Ticketmaster. There's been a lot of negative connotations and negative public perceptions thrown around against Ticketmaster. So let's publicly and positively reverse that with positive information, such as the new mission statement. So a refined new mission statement sets the core values for you guys to put on your website, which can be externally published and shine a light on Ticketmaster acknowledging the problem, but also being willing to solve it. Lastly, contacting HR departments and upper management to begin building teams help get this talent and internal trust built, internalized, that you can externally present with your media, with your new mission statement. Ticketmaster board, thank you again. I hope you can join us in establishing trust in ticketing, and we're happy to answer questions with you all.
Thank you. You did it within about a minute to spare, so good job. If you could kill your video so that we have a chance to look at you, that would be great.
Yep, I think Adam just took it all. Sweet.
Matthew, do you want to start
Yeah,
in your
thank you.
role?
Sure, yeah, certainly. Thank you, BAG team, for sharing this analysis with us. Really appreciate it. Very insightful. Clearly, you've done the research. I do have a couple of technical questions on the recommendations. On the fee cap piece where you're just showing the bar chart basically, where it's like 50% for the face value plus the extras. I mean, as a consumer, somebody going on the website buying something, the fees would be the 30% profit plus the 30% or whatever it would be, 20 or 30% for the service fees for the location as well. So doesn't that all come together? And isn't that non-transparent when you don't have it filtered on to include the prices of all those fees? The question I'm asking is, isn't that too high? So you were talking about 30%. And I mean, doesn't that need to include all the fees, all inclusive?
Yeah, I can talk about it real quick. And so, yeah, the total amount of fees associated with each cost of the ticket is usually about 50 to 60%. And we understand that's very high, but something Grant touched on in the problem section was that unlike most of our competitors, Ticketmaster needs those high amount of fees in order to sustain the business. Because a lot of these other competitors like StubHub and Eventbrite, they just do ticketing and they do it for other like much smaller events. While Ticketmaster does much larger events like concerts and those kinds of things, and they have to pay a lot of upfront money to get those contracts, and that's where like the operating expenses come in. So they need to subsidize those with the fees. And so I think to answer your question, we as a business, Ticketmaster needs to have these high fees. And when you get to like the point where Andrew was talking about where they don't show up on Ticketmaster's website, that's where like what wouldn't be showing up. It's like that 50 to 60% in fees additional to the cost of the ticket.
Okay. Now
Does
I
that answer
understand
the question?
I guess so, yeah. So the point is when somebody goes to finalize a transaction, the actual price they can pay is up to 50% or double basically. It could be double what the face value is of what they've saw in the list.
Well, it would be 50%. So that wouldn't be double. So if it was like $300, it would be like 450 that they'd be paying in total.
Okay, that's not what the bar chart would say, because if it was $300 ticket and that's 50%, that's the face value, you would double it to 600 just to do the math. But anyway, I guess that's besides the point. The other question I had was about the discussion around price transparency. So that you've done some good research there. I don't know if I understood the difference with the hotel site and then the computer site, but basically what you're saying is, if I understand correctly, more transparency does not dissuade purchasers, even if the prices are higher. So you can charge more as long as you're transparent about it, and people will actually pay more and be willing to do that. Is that correct?
Yes. So the hotel pricing versus the laptop pricing was trying to show that difference in some prices that are more dynamic and change with demand, which is what Ticketmaster sort of follows, and then those products that don't get affected by dynamic pricing. But yes, the intention of that was to display that there's this apprehension, I think, in the industry that if we show a lower face value and then tack on those fees at the end, we will increase those sales. But it actually is not true. That's a bit of a misunderstanding. It is that transparency makes those consumers feel safe along the way, and it won't affect that total number of tickets purchased. Yes.
And just to add on to Ange, implementing this transparency ultimately helps the fans be more educated on where this money is getting dispersed to. Specifically in my section, some of the fees go to the venues and the artists and they're dispersed through their contractual relationship. So as a fan, you might be more willing to pay that higher price when you know your favorite artist is getting some of that money you're putting up. So having this transparency with the rollout plans, with the graphics from start to finish throughout the whole point of purchase process, that'll help fans justify not only the high price, but also be more comfortable with the transparency.
Thank you.
Jessica?
Thank you. Something I wanted to ask the team about is the mission statement. So I love the mission statement and how it reads and how you sort of pulled from implied values there. What I wanted to press on a little bit is how does this help us day to day? From my experience, having worked in ethical culture and thought about codes of conduct and statements like this, usually the way I've thought about it is that something like that is posted that infuses to the company culture and how the employees are behaving and making decisions, and then kind of ultimately trickles out to our audiences externally that way, sort of through employees living and breathing it. So, you know, how fast, I guess, do you think the turnaround really is in terms of doing our website with a new mission statement and it actually infusing into our culture and getting out there to the external world? Can you just speak a little bit more to tangibly how you view the mission statement rewrite as helping our organization and more logistics behind that?
Yeah, I can start real quick regarding the internalization from a company standpoint of the mission statement. So this excellence, trust, and innovation from an internal standpoint, Ticketmaster cannot fix their outward facing presence if their companies are not feeling that internal value and fulfillment that the mission statement portrays. So with the honest and fair engagement, that has to be internalized from a company standpoint before we can even think about getting that for the customers from an outward facing perspective. So building the culture from an excellence, trust, and innovative standpoint ultimately goes back to the new mission statement, which revolves to honest and integrity. And I know Adam would like to speak about this as well.
Yeah, I think when we were thinking about developing this mission statement, the first use we saw was it to be used by your team, since we understood that currently your company doesn't have any like clear core values. And so we wanted to wrap them all into one mission statement. So really, at first glance, this is for your team. When you go about implementing our recommendations, that you can kind of reflect on how you're supposed to go about doing it, and ultimately why. Because a lot of times we see problems with ethical solutions. Is the why isn't this making me money already? Why, like the why behind why the reason for implementing that solution. But if you have a mission statement that kind of exudes this idea that you want to be honest and transparent with your fans because it will lead to future financial returns, then that will help you better implement your recommendation. Now, as regards to like the outward like promotion of it, which I view it as like the second step to the implementation of the mission statement, that is something we believe in. If you think back to our timeline, the last part of that timeline was promotion, and that's when we will actually start promoting this mission statement. Because a big problem your company is facing is this poor PR and like reputation that is being like deteriorated by these lawsuits. And so it doesn't take just creating these new graphics and instituting this cap on revenue, but it's also about like showing that your company is almost turning a different way, kind of like adopting new persona within the market. And we've seen that work very well in like terms of like the stock price. That's like a new way to give more positive reinforcement to your investors so that they feel that they can trust your company more. And it's almost like a big marketing way to show growth in a company. And so we really do see that being the second part of our solution. And in terms of a timeline, after that 4 months, when we actually start marketing and distributing that mission statement along with our solutions, we do see some quick turnaround with this in the market. Then lastly, with the internal employees, I think that will fall afterwards and after you get like this mission statement out into the public and the fans start to trust you more and the artists start to trust you more and the lawsuits go down and really the whole situation is resolved.
Also, to maybe address that question of how long do you think it'll take to see that behavior change within the company? I think the mission, putting that out there firstly, and then combined with our two recommendations, which are really quite aggressive and I think big points to hit, changing that the way that we act in our policy or the way that the company acts in the policy, I think will translate into that culture changing quite rapidly as well.
Thank you.
Jeff?
I think you put something in the chat, team, so take a look at the chat.
Yeah, in the event that I cut out, I added my questions to the chat so you can read it as well. A couple of things. First, if our pricing is already justified, you've identified a number of reasons why our prices are the way they are. If they're already justified, then why do we need a cap? It seems like we create a cap when we've artificially inflated a price. Follow-up questions with that. How is this model different than other entertainment venues? For example, NBA playoff games and NFL playoff games, their similar prices go through the roof based on demand. It seems like, when Taylor Swift sells out Madison Square Garden 9.3 seconds, we have a serious demand issue there as well. And then the final piece of this, and this is for the revenue cap, actually all three of these are, when we talk about artificially inflating prices, it seems to me like you've already covered that. It seems like that's in our marketing piece. If you buy a De Beers diamond, for example, the markup is 300%. Nobody complains about that. Other areas of consumer goods, markups are very high. Nobody complains about that because it has a perceived worth. So I'm not sure that I'd like to hear more justification of a revenue cap. As a capitalist, anything that has to do with limiting revenues makes me prickle a little bit. Everything else I like. I think transparency is important. I think there's no question. It's like a bait and switch. You're harming consumers if you don't tell them up front what the prices are. Nothing makes me madder than when I get harmed. But the rest of it, to me, is dangerously close to couching our ethics in litigation and in law and in things that are not of a moral base. That's all.
So 3 questions.
Yes, so just to recap, Jeff, what you were saying, firstly, how does this compare to NBA playoff games or NFL games? Secondly, was it inflating? Is this not what was that lot? What were the last 2 that you said? Just so that we have those clear 3 questions laid out to answer.
Why don't you answer the first one?
Yeah, Jeff, you're on mute.
So to compare this to the NBA playoff games and then NFL game prices, both the NBA and the NFL do sell their tickets through Ticketmaster, and we see those prices soaring very, very high as well. In the cases that we looked specifically at that entertainment sector of our industry and of the talent that we represent, that you represent as Ticketmaster. So we didn't touch on NBA and NFL playoff tickets just as a way to sort of deliver that information more concisely, but the same problem does exist, and it isn't a problem that is just been confined to that entertainment industry. It does also exist in the NBA playoff space and the NFL playoff NFL games as well. I'm sorry, I'm not versed in sport terminology, but it's a Ticketmaster problem that we wish to address, and it's not to do with the different talent that we have. It is just that we've chosen specific case studies for this presentation, but I think Grant has something also to add on to that, so I'll pass it off to him.
Thank you. Another key thing for us to address and just increase clarity on, we tackled with our recommendations pretty much everything that did not relate to face value of the ticket. So we're looking at the fees, we're looking at venue charges, artist charges, and those fees that get dispersed through those other stakeholders. We know that this industry and the face value of tickets are relatively market and demand based, and those prices relatively set themselves. And we know from you guys as a business standpoint, Ticketmaster can't really control that because it's relatively artificial given the demand and market influence. So that's kind of why our recommendation is mainly fee-based as far as restructuring the presentation, but also the dispersion techniques with those fees. And I don't know if Adam or Kate wanted to add anything else on.
Yeah, I also think with the NBA playoffs or the NFL, that's a different target market. And I haven't seen as many of the issues right now, why they're being sued is because they don't perceive the price of the ticket to be indicative of the value of the ticket. So honestly, that's why we were focusing on the entertainment industry, because there are a lot of legality, like there's a lot of lawsuits in that area right now. And so we were just kind of trying to troubleshoot for that segment. But yeah, our solution, like the fee cap, that to address a question asked earlier with like the breakdown of that chart, it wouldn't be 50% on top of the face value. The face value would be what the artist believes they're owed. That's like what the artist, if they were not going through Live Nation, Live Nation's like the venue. If they weren't going through the venue, if they weren't going through Ticketmaster, that's what they would sell it at. Then you have the venue charge, and that's like the expenses that it costs the venue to, put the show on and what they're taking out of it. So that's them. And then the fee charge on top of that, that's what Ticketmaster is taking off the top for their integration and their connection to the venue and the artist, to the fans. So that's kind of what that chart meant.
And we want to touch on Jeff asking us, why should we do this if specifically with the NFL and the NBA, if there hasn't been any pushback like we've seen with Taylor Swift or Harry Styles. And also touching on what Caitlin said with that perceived value with the artists versus the sports players. We saw in one case study that BTS tickets went up to something like $20,000. And that is, although on the resale market, I mean, the resale market is also connected to Ticketmaster, which is why it relates to this case. But just because legally we can do that and it has been done before does not mean that ethically we should be charging $20,000 for one BTS concert ticket through our platform. That does not represent good business values. That does not represent what Ticketmaster should stand for. And just because legally there hasn't been, or even not legally, but through fan discourse, there hasn't been any pushback on that, we don't want to base our decisions off of when our customers make complaints. We want to, as a company, and again, targeting excellence, innovation, trust, solve those problems before it gets out of hand.
I'd like to ask a question, and it builds really off of what Matthew and Adam were talking about. I think as a newcomer to the board, I am particularly concerned about statements like, we need high fees to stay in business. It has a resonance about it that immediately, no matter what you say about trust and transparency, can easily come back to us as a board, as a company. And it didn't get the impression that Matthew was comfortable with the math going on. Math is not my specialty, but I would like clarity about what actually we're talking about when we're talking about the fees, because that says a great deal about our integrity. And so if you could clarify that, Adam, and just, or anyone.
What specifically do you want clarity on regarding the fees? Just
Well,
how
there was a distinction of what the price actually would be.
Yeah. Yes.
And Matthew had a basis for saying that, and you have a basis for what you're saying, and I'm left with, I have no idea what's real here.
Yeah. So
help me out.
I also, I understand. And I apologize for misspeaking before. So the way it works,
You didn't misspeak.
typically, yeah, of course. So like we saw with like Angela's example that like, if, for example, if a ticket price listed on Ticketmaster, the face value is $300, the total cost when you add fees in would be $600. So if you utilize like a breakdown of 50% of the face value is the, oh gosh. So you have the ticket cost, 50% of that ticket cost would be the face value. Then roughly 30% would be a fee. The other 50% would be fees. And then breaking that down, 30% is goes to expenses and 20% goes to profit for Ticketmaster. So in the case of a ticket, sorry, yes, I didn't want to cut you off.
No, I didn't say anything.
That was awesome. So in case of like a ticket that costs in total $600, 50% of that would be $300, and that's the face value. And the other 50%, which would be again $300, would be for the fees. And so that's where the fees come into play to that total cost of the ticket.
So that's what Matthew said in the first place.
Yes, that's great. I just did the math on that.
Okay, no, I just want to understand, because that's an enormous, I know we have a lot of wealthy people in the United States. We have a lot of people who adore Styles and other people who are not wealthy. And it just, it's a concern to me about whether or not, and I know that the CEO won't appreciate my comment, and I'll live with that. It seems to me that should not part of the process be working with venues and the other entities that drive this whole thing? Is it not going to be in everybody's best interest that we figure out ways not to make this only a rich person's opportunity?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that's something we wrestle with a lot when addressing this problem. We see in one respect when Grant was talking about the dominance of Live Nation and Ticketmaster, that your company almost has like the ability to price those tickets that way because no other company can compete with Ticketmaster. And now I understand that may seem like a bad thing. That's like when Ticketmaster has a monopoly. But what I would argue, if you're looking at this from like a capitalistic perspective, is that actually is not such a bad thing, because part of the reason Ticketmaster needs to charge these high fees is because of the mass scale they have as a company. And I would argue the scale that they have as a company allows them to do a lot of things smaller companies cannot. If you think of just the software capabilities they have to process all these tickets, to promote all these artists, that actually provides a lot of value on the end for the fans that warrants those high prices. So I would actually argue that it's unrealistic to expect a company to still have the same like services as Ticketmaster to be able to charge less fees and less prices overall because of like what is required of a big player in this market. So it's a kind of like a two-way thing. And I think right now it makes most sense for Ticketmaster not to just lower their fees, but to find ways to like almost justify the high fees they need to charge for their fans.
Okay, thank you. And we have exceeded, we've just finished our 20 minutes of being in our roles, and now we get to talk to you about a couple of things as who we are. We get to talk to you about what we thought of the presentation, and I'm so sorry Jeff isn't part of this. And we share with you what we thought the strengths were and what feedback you might want to have for other things. And I'm especially interested, oh good, Jeff's back. I'm especially interested in talking with you about the 90-second and the 10-minute, because that's about tomorrow. And so first, let's just sort of divide our time, which reminds me, I need to create time here. And we have until what, 4:30? And I also want you all to be able to ask us questions just in your role of anything you want to, ask. So let me just sort of start off by, and we can each sort of give a comment and then come back again and again, rather than us talking 5 things at a time and then moving it to someone else. I guess I think you took a certainly very important subject. I think that you had a lot of good information. From a presentation standpoint, I was kind of curious that you talked directly to us, but then when you were creating, when you had a particular role, you all turned to the other side. Were you looking at, I mean, I wasn't sure what you were looking at, but all of you did the same thing. And I'm just wondering what was on the other side and what was that about?
I think we have I'm not sure if this is what you were like when we started our presentation, we all shifted to the other side.
Mhm.
I know for me, I have a timer going on so I can see sort of where I am, just timing myself, because we did split those parts up to make sure we didn't go over time, which I know we ended just 1 minute before, and we all have very busy schedules. So just to make sure. And I also had my visual just in case that Zoom crashed to have the PowerPoint up as well.
Oh, so you each had the PowerPoint up when you were talking.
Not sure if that's what everyone else has.
I was just curious.
And I was sharing my screen, so I was just looking at my screen because the PowerPoint was already on.
Yeah, I wasn't looking at anything. I was off in the head.
No, you were looking over to the side too.
Oh, I was? I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at my visuals on like the actual screen, but I
Okay.
wasn't looking at anything else, no.
Okay, thanks. So I pass it on to Jeff. You might as well, even though you missed a little bit of it. Is there anything you could say to the part of the presentation that you heard that would be supportive and helpful to them in terms of feedback?
Yeah, actually, I think I heard
about I-
most of it. It's mostly by you're speaking to a board. So in the chat, I'll add a couple comments to the chat, but in general,
Okay, that'd be great. Sorry, you need to do that.
yeah.
So-
So I'll go ahead and
okay.
do that.
Okay, thank you. Jessica, what's your feedback on the presentation?
If you don't mind me just clumping my presentation specific feedback, I just want to comment some positive remarks around how I felt you appeared very polished. I love the unified background. You're prompt and confident. Your transitions are very seamless and informative, both in terms of handing to the next person, maybe summarizing either what was just said or what's to come. From a slide perspective, I also love the tracking at the bottom. So as an audience, we know where you're headed and on what section we're focusing. I thought you had a really clear problem and solution. Even at the start, you gave away what I would call the bottom line on top, which is something I often don't see that I love to see, where we know right away where you're going, which gives the audience great peace of mind that there's a plan and that we'll hear about it as we go through. I think the only other positive thing I wanted to note on this too is that at the Q&A section, you were rephrasing the question or confirming clarity, which was nicely done and also can sometimes get missed. Only a couple point outs is for me, maybe just working in corporate America where we are so focused on DEI, et cetera, use of the word guys, like you guys, for example, is for some reason just personally distracting for me, and want to call out that at least at Google, we've been told to try to avoid saying something like that. So I wanted to point that out. It's super nitpicky, but just FYI. And then sometimes quite fast paced, which maybe is what Gail was getting at, seems almost scripted. So just consider use of your tone and pace and coming across as authentically as you can in a more conversational tone. That's my only piece of constructive feedback on the presentation style. Great job.
Thank you.
Matthew.
Great. Yeah, I would agree with basically everything that Jessica said. My impression is, I think you guys killed it. I think you did a great job. Clearly, you've spent a lot of time and effort putting this all together in the research, thinking through the problem and potential solutions. You did a really nice job with the presentation, clearly articulated, well-spoken, good handoffs, etc. Everything that Jessica said. I like the formatting of your pages, etc. Well done. Small minor thing in terms of feedback. You had a couple of spelling errors and typos on the pages. So you can go back and check those. I think convenience was misspelled, control was misspelled, uncertainty, I think, was misspelled, all I think right in the beginning. A small thing. The main thing in my view that was a challenge, and I think Adam, you went back and clarified that calculation, but if you just look at that chart, and if it's 300 and that's 50%, to get to 100, it's going to be 600. To get to the 100%, it's going to be $600. But then, like, the whole premise of the advice you're giving to this board is that the industry standard is somewhere between 20 and 30% for the total fees. But that's not the way that you presented the math on the page, so that if it worked out that way, it would be 50% in fees. If you had the service fee plus the fee of the profit for the company, Ticketmaster. And that's a big difference versus competitors. And that actually just changes everything. So I don't know if that was maybe a mistake or not, or just communicated differently. But if in the marketplace, competitors are 20 to 30%, then that chart that you showed doesn't make sense. And then the other thing about the price transparency page and the hotels and the thing that I was asking about. So I don't have the copy of the page, but if I understand the difference in the prices between what consumers were willing to pay when there is higher transparency, what you should do is you should calculate the percentage difference. And I think just going back to that page, it was like single digit difference or very low double digits in the tens or teens. So you could go back and check that. But if it's less than like a 30% difference in the prices, you see my point? Like if consumers are only willing to pay because of transparency in the low double digits, in the tens, if you throw on the top 30% through this transparency, that you see the difference, like that's actually probably going to drive some lowering sales, some volume decrease. So I thought that that was something that, you know, you maybe could have addressed. Hopefully that's clear, the feedback I'm offering. So just check that variance and see if that still makes sense from a strategy perspective. But I think you guys did a great job.
Thank you.
Jessica, could you in chat put your, I see that you need to leave at 4:20. I need to talk with you. I'm asking the judges to stay after, and I understand you're back to back. So if there's some way that you can, I'll give you my phone number so you can call and give me some feedback. Can you write it down?
Write down my
Hello?
phone number, Gail. Is that
Oh,
what you're saying?
write down my phone number so that you can
Oh,
call
sure.
me when you're able to. 714
Okay.
655 4684.
Okay.
And let me read what Jeff said in case, just because it's important that that be put out here. He said, in general, slow down. Grant and Angela went pretty fast. Only one other thing, refer to a board as this board or something similar rather than you guys. Other than that, very good. So what I'd like to do in the limited time we have, I want to talk about how you can address the 10-minute in the who are the people that are going to be doing it? Two of you.
Plus, except Adam, it should
Yeah.
be.
So it's going to be 3 of you.
Grant, Ange, and Kate.
Okay, that's a lot of people. So think about as you're doing it, think about, and I totally agree with the notion of how you present that. It is very personal. I don't know if you can be standing up so that there's more of a sense of, I don't know how you can work that if you can, but it's very important that you make connection with the audience, which didn't happen as much, this time because of looking at the slides and stuff. So when you think about what you want your message to be, think about, well, let me ask you, what would the key points be for you around the message of ethics only? It's not about prices and it's not about, a lot of other things. It's about what is it that you're doing that is driving ethics?
For me, I know specifically a stakeholder analysis, seeing how each group of people that we analyzed are impacted from an ethical standpoint. That's kind of where my main portion of it starts off. Ange can speak on her part.
Oh, I wasn't aware we had to answer that. I think I'm touching on those, looking at what Ticketmaster has on the Who We Are website, and then drawing out those implied values. And then I think I go on to talk about what those implied values mean, and then how I'm not sure if we should touch on how it's currently running, but I was planning on saying how what it's currently running is violating those stakeholder rights as a part of those ethical policies.
Okay. Keep in mind that, think of yourself as the consultants that you are, and maybe in a couple of years when you graduate, and think about the so-called flattery of somebody being interested enough in what you said in the big picture the day before. They want you to come back and dig deeper. So as you think about this, you really need to dig more deeply into the ethical piece of it. I'm not saying that what you said isn't enough. I'm just saying, as a context, it makes sense to be, if you think about a real situation in which you would be coming back as consultants, this is a real opportunity to sell without acting like you're selling. But what you're using and the information that you're providing makes it easier for them to be able to see a whole picture. I don't know if Jessica and Matthew have anything that they would want to add to what they think would help you be as effective as I know you want to be tomorrow. Anything? Okay.
No, nothing specific. I mean, the piece around the example around BTS and the 20,000. I mean, I guess that Ticketmaster is not exactly an auction site, so it's not driving at, a pure price supply versus demand. There is dynamic pricing, but that's not exactly what's going on. It's not an auction. So I don't know, the ethical issue around high prices, that's for me, not the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is on the transparency of the fees. So, a ticket could be $1 million for all I care, as long as there's a marketplace for that. But if you tack on another $1 million in fees, that's a big problem, right? So I would focus on, as a business, as a for-profit business, focus on the transparency piece to connect with the artist and the fans, like you talked about, which was excellent. The piece around the actual price of the face value, in my view, is less important. There will be a market for those prices for those tickets at varying price points. But I think the most important thing is the transparency piece and the connection with your stakeholders. I think that's most important.
And I would add the values piece that one of you talked about, that, and thinking about what those values really should mean to the company beyond perhaps what it is now, taking them to a deeper level, if that's possible. Obviously, you are with transparency. And Jeff said, for content, be careful of legal and financial minimalisms. Overall, I like the recommendations and visuals. And of course, tomorrow it won't have an impact on the financial or the legal. In terms of the 90-second, who's doing that?
I'm doing that. Okay.
And you're comfortable with the context. I mean, this is a wonderful opportunity when you all graduate and are in companies where ethics isn't talked about in a problem.
Yeah.
It's really important to be able to feel really comfortable with that. So it's a wonderful exercise, and hopefully you will really enjoy doing it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Any questions of us?
Yes. Going back to what Matthew said about how the transparency would be the issue he would focus more, or you would focus more on. Would you think that I should, or as a team, we should stray away from maybe talking about the face value? Or if we touch on that, would that open up more questions that take away from the ethical considerations? Should we just stay on those fees and the transparency policies that we want to implement?
In short answer, yes. And my view for that, the reason for that is that the face value is determined by the quality of the artist and the draw of the artist and what the artist thinks that they can charge and what's fair for them to charge directly to their fans, considering the current year and dynamics and what people are willing to pay, right? And so that goes to the artist. As a business for Ticketmaster, all the other fees is what's relevant for us as a company. And that's where we have decision-making power. So I think the face value, is decided by the artist, right? That's how you communicated it. So I would focus then only on the fees portion of it. That's what we can control. That's how we can communicate transparency, etc. I think that's the business aspect to it.
And just a quick follow-up on that. When we are communicating those fees and that transparency and talking about how that is the realm in which we do have that power to make decisions, if we receive pushback from the judge or the judges, the way that we did receive from you guys, from the board, not supposed to say you guys, from the judges that are currently with us, but if we do receive that pushback that we did from today's presentation, how should we go about addressing it? Speaking to the fact that we don't believe we should lower the fees. Would an approach?
You don't need to worry about that because
Okay.
nobody's going to ask you any questions. Tomorrow is just today our role was pushback.
Okay.
To figure out what your deeper thinking was and to see, if there might be areas. But tomorrow you'll have an Uber judge, and there may be some other judges who come, and they're going to give you feedback, but they're not going to ask you questions. That phase is over. So be comfortable about that. Because you don't need to worry about it.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Well, I really appreciate that you all invested the enormous amount of time that you did. When did you start doing this?
We started planning, Adam, when was our first meeting? Like
I have it in the
It's probably been a little over a month, I'd say.
24th
So-
of March.
Well,
Yeah.
you deserve a lot of credit. It's a subject that is certainly very popular. And it would be great if you had the fun of feeling down the road that even though they didn't know that you came up with some of those ideas, that they do some of those ideas.
Gail, I have a follow-up question from the team, if it's okay.
Sure.
So did your team look at predatory scalping as a motivator or a driver of prices? That I would imagine you probably would have had to, given the depth of the research that you went into. How do we address that? How do we address somebody who comes in and they have a software program where they buy up 30% of the tickets in the first couple of minutes and then charge whatever price they want, and it's completely out of our hands. That was under a number of lawsuits that came up, but I didn't hear it in your presentation anywhere. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah,
Yes.
so those lawsuits were different law. So we focused on specifically the Robertson-Patman Act, which had to deal with price discrimination against different groups. So our whole case was based around making sure that everyone who wants to get a ticket has the ability to get a ticket for the value that it should be at. I think those legal cases deal with the Sherman Act, if I'm not mistaken, and that's a different law. So we decided to kind of focus in on these lawsuits and address this problem instead of that one.
And that's partly why I didn't ask during the presentation, because I knew you're on a different track. I'm just looking for a personal opinion on, as a consumer, and understanding my impression of Ticketmaster is going to drive how much business I want to do with them. If I come in and they're charging prices that are double, it's going to make me mad. If they're hiding prices, it's going to make me mad. But also if I come in to try to buy tickets, and in the first couple of seconds, my computer, everything's locked up and all the tickets are sold because there's a bunch of scalpers out there, that's also going to affect my willingness to deal with Ticketmaster and my impression of the artist. So, but I know it's not specifically related to that act, so I left it out of the presentation. I'm just curious as to your opinion on it.
I can speak real quick to that because one of the biggest struggles that we had with this case, I think, Gail, you kind of alluded to it, was identifying the problem and also identifying a problem we can actually solve, since this is such a large scale problem.
Yeah.
And we talked about this idea of monopoly and how do we address that? And we thought that's hard in itself because we're not a regulatory body, so we can't regulate what Ticketmaster is doing. And then when it came to the price scalping, and we talked about the secondary market for tickets where people use bots to buy all these tickets and then they sell them for tons of money. We recognized our own experience and we didn't think we had qualified enough to address that, because that would take a lot of technology, understanding to suggest how they could create some algorithm or software to combat that. So we decided to focus more on what we're good at, which is this price transparency and stuff, which is more ethically driven rather than this tech strategy that we would need in order to address that problem.
Springsteen had a lottery for one of his concerts where people could log in. I don't know if it was through Ticketmaster, but they could register, and then they had so many seats assigned that at certain prices. And it was a lottery basis. And that was in direct response to him being really mad about inflated ticket prices. But I get it. It's complicated. It's not an easy thing to answer, or it would have already been answered.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions that you might have?
I can actually throw in one question. So I understand for this presentation we referenced the judging form to understand like what was being expected of us. For the 90-second presentation, I was curious if you could speak a little bit to like, what would you say is like the main thing you're looking for, aside from, since it is only 90 seconds and there's not that much you can say in that period of time.
Let me just read this and imagine you're an employee of the company whose case you've been studying. You're at a meeting in which people are discussing the issue. However, no one's brought up ethics. There's a pause in the conversation. You have 90 seconds in which to convince the other people at the meeting that there are ethical issues that ethical issues needed to be addressed. You don't have to argue for a solution. You just need them to see that there are serious ethical issues there. One member of the team will do this. So I think you don't waste time.
Yeah.
You get to create the context in which you're going to say, wait a minute,
Yeah.
what we're not talking about here, or I think we've forgotten, or whatever, because it doesn't matter that none of us know what came before.
Mhm.
All that matters is the point at which you set by starting to talk. And you can certainly, it's about this issue, so you can make a comment for 90. It doesn't say that you have to do this, but I'm assuming, yes, it does. You're an employee of the company whose case you've been studying. So technically you might be a master, whatever it is. This is my fourth or fifth,
Yeah.
thing today.
No worries.
And then you move from there to what you feel are the most passionate, the most credible, the way of bringing in colleagues who don't care about ethics. Matthew, you said you were raising your hand to say something.
Yeah, so I mean, if that's the case in terms of the format of what's required for the 90 seconds, you just have to convince your colleagues about the ethical issue. My guidance would be to focus on those 2 pages where you talked about the fans and the artists and the issue that was created. So that was the trust issue. And then the second page was about the impact. I think 90 seconds, somehow distilling a message on just those 2 pages, it draws out the ethical issue and it talks about the impact. If you can make it really crisp, I think that's where you would score the most points.
Okay.
And you need to make it real, because a number of times over the years, somebody has come passionately throwing their arms and it's like a drama effect. And I'm thinking, holy moly.
That would never happen.
And the language is so artificial. So what matters is really talking as if you were talking to your colleagues who were missing a point that you really needed to get out there. And the realer, the better.
Mhm.
And you can use your stage presence for other things.
Yeah, of course. Don't want to be
All
too
right.
much.
Good luck tomorrow on the 90-second, and good luck on the 10-minute. And I think you deserve huge credit for the amount of work and the difficulty of the subject. I mean, I liked being a board member who didn't know, because I think on the face of it, it's not pleasant to understand the amount of money that people are going to have to pay. But yet that's part of the reality. And there's a way that you'll frame what will make it more ethical.
Yeah. Great. Well,
Thank
we
you.
appreciate it. Thanks for
If
giving
I
us.
can, thank you. And if I can keep Jeff and Matthew, that would be great. And Jessica's on the phone. So thank you.